In this example, we're going to construct a binomial probability distribution given that n equals 6 and p equals 0.85. We'll also look at finding its mean and standard deviation and some other things about the distribution, such as its graph and any type of shape that it has. So let's start by looking at the e-text for this particular section. This is section 6.2, the binomial probability distribution. And we are given this formula for finding the probabilities. The probability of obtaining X successes in N independent trials of a binomial experiment is given by this formula. N choose X, and that's combination as well, you could say that, times P to the X times 1 minus P raised to the N minus X. P is the probability of success, and X is the number of successes, and N is the total number of trials. So looking back at our problem, N here is 6. P, the probability of success, is 0.85. X are these values here in this first column. So we could go through and compute these by hand using some technology anyway. I don't want you having to compute combinations by hand. So I want to show you a method relying on StatCrunch, maybe even a little bit more than just this. I also have videos in our playlist about how you can do the same type of thing using the TI-84. But for this one, I want to show about StatCrunch. So let's open up StatCrunch. All right, so I'm going to begin by naming this first column X, just so I can keep up with it. And I will type in those different values of X that we were given in our chart. And then for this column, I'm going to go to Data, Compute, and Expression. And what I want to do is build an expression that is the same thing as that formula that we saw from the e-text. And that would be this formula here. So I'm going to build this formula into that second column. So we start with N choose X, or in other words, 6 choose X, because X is, we're going to refer to that first column X. So let me go back to StatCrunch, and I will use a combination. This is StatCrunch's way of calculating combinations. And I'll type 6, move my arrow over, and then I want to refer to column X. So I just double click that there. Then I'm going to multiply by the next thing. So let's go back to the text. Sorry, here we are. P to the X times 1 minus P raised to the N minus X. Okay, here in our problem, P here is 0.85. Okay, so I'm going to refer to that in StatCrunch. So I'll type 0.85 raised to the X. Again, I'll just double click X right here, times 1 minus 0.85. I'm just going to go ahead and calculate that. That's 0.15 raised. And here I need to make sure I use parentheses to the 6 minus X. And just to confirm, let's go back and see where we got these pieces from. Again, from this formula that either we would do by hand, maybe in some parts, but we would want to use some type of technology to kind of speed up this process. Okay, so we'll select OK, compute, and now I see those probabilities here in this column. I could rename this column just to match what I had in the problem. Here it is, P of X. So I could rename it P of X if I like, but I'm going to go through now. This is one nice thing about StatCrunch is I could go through and like copy, Control C for copy or Command C, depending on what type of device you're using. Copy that and paste it into my answer. I always like to grab at least one more digit than what's being asked for. just so that when I come back here, I can then round. Oh, actually, it ended up taking the whole thing. But anyway, I need to round to 4 places behind the decimal. And now I have that binomial probability distribution. For the next couple of parts of this problem, we're asked to find the mean and standard deviation. And I want to refer to the technology tips. Let me bring over this document. I do need to decrease its size just a little bit here so we can see everything. So specifically this particular part right here. So we're going to enter our values in StatCrunch, which actually we've already done. We built them by using the calculate feature. Next, we'll select Stat, Calculators, Custom, and then we'll select the values that we need, X and P of X, and then we'll compute. So let's go through that process. Okay, so that was Stat, Calculators, and Custom. Our variables are in the first list, X. Our weights are the probabilities, P of X, and then we will compute. And we see here the mean and standard deviation towards the bottom of the output. We also see a graph of what this binomial probability distribution looks like. For part C, it asks us to compute the mean and standard deviation by these formulas. And we could just pick up any calculator, standard calculator, and come to the side here and do that. Remember, N is 6, P is 0.85, and 1 minus P is 1 minus 0.85, or in other words, 0.15. Notice that we get the same values. In part D, we're asked to draw the graph of the probability distribution and comment on its shape. We could do this by going back to the original table, but if you recall, when we went to StatCrunch and looked at that, the mean and standard deviation that we were trying to calculate, we also came up with this, or it came up with this graph of the binomial probability distribution. So now we can just come back and match the best graph and comment on its shape, which in this case is skewed left. There is one other way to arrive at the graph using StatCrunch, and that is to go to Stat, Calculators, and Binomial. And this is probably the most common way for myself whenever I'm trying to find a graph, because I'm also looking for a particular probability. So you see here towards the bottom of the screen, I come in here and I type in those parameters given, that N is 6 and P is 0.85. And I'm not going to change anything else just yet, but I'll click compute and it's showing me this graph. But if I want to see some other information here at the bottom of the screen, like for instance, the probability of exactly 2, I can come down here and say the probability that X equals 2 and compute. And notice it's just that one piece of the graph that's highlighted. I actually have the same value here that I had from the table. So if you didn't like the method of coming up here at the top and using the formula to calculate these in sort of a spreadsheet type of way, you could come to this calculator and change these pieces one by one and get these different calculations that you needed to build the table, and as well see the graph at the same time.